Oh, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Women in Translation. My name is Jose, and I'm a librarian here at LA County Library, and I am joined by my colleague. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ana Silvia, and I'll be one of the presenters today. And we welcome you to this really fun, this is the second year that we're doing this Spotlight on Women in Translation Month. So let me tell you a little bit about what Women in Translation Month is all about. The first Women in Translation Month was celebrated in 2013, and it was started as an initiative by the book blogger Maytel Radinsky, who believes that women writers who write in languages other than English deserve to be translated and appreciated. So now we are in 2024. So this movement started off very small in the book blogging community, and it's still going strong with now organizations like ours, libraries, publishers. Everyone is really on board with trying to get the word out about these really talented women authors from around the globe. There's also bingo. This year they didn't do one. I still wanted to show you and include this bingo from 2022, just because maybe this is your first year participating in Women in Translation Month. And it's always already a challenge to start reading Women in Translation Month if this is your first month or if you're a seasoned Women in Translation Month reader. This bingo, I think, is really fun because it challenges you to explore different authors that you probably wouldn't have thought to pick up. I've done this bingo in the past, and it wouldn't have occurred to me to pick up a book by a Balkan writer or a book that's written in an extinct language. So yeah, maybe check out this bingo if you're sort of trying to figure out what to read or want some inspiration. It's always really fun to play a game while you're and in the process you discover some really fun books. Here's a snapshot that gives you a glimpse as to why Women in Translation Month was created, sort of the problem, the root of why Maytel Radinsky saw the need to start to highlight women authors. Here are some statistics for you. So here we have women writers in translation, and that includes fiction and poetry. So 66% of the works that are in translation are by men, and 31% of that is women, and 3% of that is other. And then when it comes to books in translation by continent, we see an overwhelming of that is by European authors. So there are a lot of other stories around the world that are not being translated. North America is just at 6%, South America is at 8%, Africa is at 4%, and Asia is at 18%. So even within what's being translated, there needs to be some work there as well. And then also when it comes to reviews of women writers in translation, we also see that there is a big gap between men and women. 62% of reviews of books in translation are men authors, and we have 36% by women and 2% other. Now, reviews, of course, are really important because that's how a lot of people discover their next reads, especially nowadays with things like Instagram and Book Talk and YouTube. And even with us here at the library or bookstores, recommendations carry a lot of weight with people, especially if I know for me, I tend to gravitate more towards a book that's been recommended by someone whose reading taste is similar to my own, or who's someone that I think has good similar reading taste, or I trust their judgment in books. So if they're mostly reviewing male authors, then there's a lot of works that I'm not hearing about that are written by women. So this is all, these stats were compiled by the 3% database that collects information on books in translation, and you can find more of this on the womenintranslation.org website, and we'll include links and resources after our presentation today if you're interested in learning more about works in translation in general. So now the fun part, which you all came here for, the recommendations. So today I have 4 for you. Jose also has 4 for you. And the way that we're going to do it is I'm going to talk a little bit about the author, share the synopsis, and then give you my thoughts. So the first book that I have for you is An Exclusive Love by Johanna Adorjan, translated from the German by Anthea Bell. Johanna Adorjan was born in 1971 in Stockholm, studied theater and opera directing. She has worked as an editor and freelance author for various newspapers and magazines. She's written theater pieces as well as screenplays that have been filmed by Ed Herzog. Johanna Adorjan lives in Berlin. And An Exclusive Love is Johanna Adorjan's grandparents. It's a memoir where she unconventionally and elegantly, her grandparents, she recounts, they were survivors, Holocaust survivors, and they fled Budapest during the uprising of 1956 and lived a glamorous and mysterious life in Denmark. Their past never discussed, even within the family. An Exclusive Love is Adorjan's poignant and loving reconstruction of what may have happened on the day of their deaths when Adorjan was just 20. Investigating the rich and surprising story of their lives, Adorjan reveals the compromises they made and risks they took and what it meant for her own family. This memoir tells of a couple's extravagant devotion to each other and their granddaughter's later discovery of complex personalities, long-buried family secrets, and why they ultimately decided together to take their own lives. And Thea Bell renders Adorjan's brilliant, constructed, powerfully concise memoir with stunning clarity. Beautifully written, tender but never sentimental, An Exclusive Love is a vivid portrait of a true 20th century couple. So I just want to issue a trigger warning for suicide if that's something that you're sensitive of. This book does touch on that. It does deal with a joint suicide. So I just want to let you know ahead of time. So this book is very beautifully written. It's thought-provoking. It's an intimate book where we're brought into a 50-year plus relationship. So we get the good, the ugly, the devotion, the resentments, really everything that encompasses a relationship. With the author, with Johanna, we join her as she uncovers the lives of her grandparents before they were her grandparents, just as they were as human beings, as individuals, and then as a married couple, which I found really interesting because I think that sometimes as grandchildren, we tend to sort of idealize our grandparents. I know for me, my grandmothers were my comfort, such a sweetness in my life. And I don't think that I ever really thought of them until I became an adult as people with their own lives before they were my grandmothers. And then learning about them, their lives as teenagers, as young women before they were wives and mothers, and their dreams and their aspirations was really interesting. So I enjoyed joining Johanna in her journey as well, especially when it came to her grandmother, someone who she always viewed as this really kind of very elegant and fierce and independent woman. And then her discovery that she was actually quite vulnerable and insecure, and that a lot of her agency was tied into being a wife. And so Johanna neither condones nor judges her grandmother or her grandparents' decision to end their lives together, but she sort of understands how their love was so intense for each other that neither one of them wanted to live a day without the other. And so it's told in a very non-judgmental way, which I found really, really beautiful. As the granddaughter, she could have chosen to be angry at her grandparents for doing that. Sometimes I think that emotion is valid and is there sometimes for people that lose people in that way. But she doesn't. She just sort of presents it as sort of a tribute to them and everything that they gave her and who she is as a person. So this book is definitely a book about relationships, romantic, familial. We see the lives of two people that deeply loved each other, and how the thought of not when you're with someone for such a long time, how the thought of not being with them anymore is terrifying, and having to say that goodbye is sort of a death of itself. And so I think for me, I came to that same sort of conclusion with Johanna. I neither judged it nor condoned it. I just sort of was in their story and respected their lives and everything that they went through, the resilience that they showed, and the devotion that they had to their family and to themselves. So this book is it's a beautiful book about love. And I think that if you're into just reading about people's lives and the intimate look into love, family, and commitment, then I think that you'll really enjoy An Exclusive Love, a memoir by Johanna Adorjan. My next pick for you is You Glow in the Dark by Liliana Golanzi, and it's translated from the Spanish by Chris Andrews. Liliana Golanzi was born in Santa Cruz in Bolivia and has published 3 collections of short stories. She teaches Latin American literature at Cornell University. She's the founder of Dum Dum Publishing House in Bolivia, an indie press focusing on fiction that mixes genres and has a foot in the jungle and one on Mars. She won the 2015 Aura Estrada Prize awarded to women writers under 35 who live in the USA, Canada, or other Latin American or in Latin America and who write in Spanish. And You Go in the Dark, Ustedes Brillan en lo Oscuro, won the prestigious Ribera del Duero Prize in 2022. The 7 stories of You Glow in the Dark unfold in a Latin America wrecked and poisoned by human greed. And yet, Colanzi's writing, at once sleek and dense, otherworldly and intensely specific, casts an eerily bright spell over the wreckage. Some stories seem to be set in the near future. All are superbly executed and yet hard to pin down. They often leave the reader wondering, was that realistic or fantastic? Colanzi draws power from Andean cyberpunk just as much as from classic horror writers, and this daring is matched by her energizing, simultaneous use of multiplicity and fragmentation, the book's stylistic trademark. Freely mixing worlds, she uses the Bolivian Altiplano as the backdrop for an urban dystopia and blends Aymara with Spanish. Colanzi never gets bogged down. She can be brutal and direct or lightheaded and subtle. I also want to issue a trigger warning for this one. Just trigger warnings in general for violence, for self-harm, for sexual assault, for gore. It's a very the stories in here are not light, so it's just in general, just it's a dark, they're dark reads. So if that's not something that you think you would enjoy, just be aware of that. So a reviewer wrote a haunting collection of stories circulating the relationship between human civilization and the natural world, Western culture and indigenous tradition. Unsettling, slightly dystopian, atmosphere aside, Colanzi can draw human portraits with the rich ink of empathy, thoughtful, enjoyable. And I agree with this statement. The first story, The Cave, is told in a very fragmented way and ends unexpectedly very violent. I was not expecting the ending of the first story, but I think it sets the tone for what we can expect for the rest of the stories. As I said, it can get very gory, very dark. But I think in general, if you like things that use that to sort of really highlight the conditions of the place, this is very rugged, very dark places, then I think you would still enjoy these stories. So what for me, I felt like while reading this does take place in Latin America, but it doesn't, there are some places where it's a little bit more specific and you can kind of gauge where they're writing from. It doesn't take place in a single country. It sort of spans all of South America, the continent, really. And it's, for me, the thing that stood out was it showed the aftermath of sort of a post-colonial society and what it leaves in the traces that we can still see in the cultures and the communities in present day. You know, we see things like addiction and generational trauma and colorism and racism and sexism, and sort of this stigmatizing of people that look different, talk different. It's really interesting kind of reflection on this society that is non-homogeneous, but shares a link of this common past. Also, the land itself is a character. It's oftentimes also portrayed very beautifully, and it's oftentimes also shown abused and exploited. Natural resources are taken from it. The people, the citizens of the land are used for cheap labor. So it's really a really interesting commentary, I thought, on this society, and those of us that are of Latin American descent. I think we can identify and see things like colorism. There's a story in here where there's a girl that's beautiful, but she's not satisfied because she doesn't have green eyes like her father. Things like that. We're also there in typical sort of Latin American fashion. Magical realism is woven into the story, so you're never quite sure what's real or what's not. There's a lot of mystical elements that are used to highlight the story, a lot of use of futurism, so we're not sure if we're in present day, we're in the dystopian future. Also, she does take events from real life. One of the stories is based off of a real event that took place in Brazil in 1987, a radiation plant that exploded in Brazil. So the story itself is fiction, but it does sort of take place or uses real life events for the backdrop. So my favorite story in the collection is The Narrow Way, which deals with the cults. And it's that's just sort of something that I enjoy reading about cults in general, this sort of insular community and the way that people rebel and come to the realization of their own identity within these type of communities. So yeah, just a really interesting collection of short stories. As I said, very dark. So if that's your thing, then I think that you'll enjoy You Glow in the Dark by Liliana Golanzi. My next pick for you is slightly on a lighter tone. It's really funny, but it's anyways, let me tell you what it's about. First, let me tell you about the author. So Helene Tristan was born in Gothenburg in 1954, and she's a Swedish writer of crime fiction. Tristan worked as a nurse and then a dentist, but was forced to leave due to illness. During her illness, she worked as a translator of medical articles. And An Elderly Lady Is Up to No Good is about Maud, and she's an irascible 88-year-old Swedish woman with no family, no friends, and no qualms about a little murder. Ever since her darling father's untimely death when she was only 18, Maud has lived in the family's spacious apartment in downtown Gothenburg, rent-free, thanks to a minor clause in a hastily negotiated contract. That was how Maud learned that good things can come from a tragedy. Now in her late 80s, Maud contents herself with traveling the world and surfing the net from the comfort of her father's ancient armchair. It's a solitary existence, and she likes it that way. Over the course of her adventures or misadventures, this little bold lady will handle a crisis with a local celebrity who has her eyes on Maud's apartment, foil the engagement of her long-ago lover, and dispose of some pesky neighbors. But when the local authorities are called to investigate a dead body found in Maud's apartment, will Maud finally become a suspect? So I thought this book was hilarious. It's just it does require a dark sense of humor. It does deal with death and with murder. Our main protagonist is essentially a serial killer, but it's just funny because it's so unexpected coming from this woman who the rest of the world, and I think in general, women of her age are sort of seen as invisible and feeble, and Maud very much plays into that to her advantage. But really, and because we're in her head and we know what she's thinking, it's really funny when people don't assume that she's the one who's committing these crimes or she has any sort of ill will towards anybody. And her sense of humor is also really funny. And so it's what I really liked about this book is that I think that, as I said before, I think society as a whole, after women after a certain age are invisible, we sort of want to remove their agency. We think that they are just happy to sort of sit around and knit sweaters for their grandkids. And we tend to forget that, we as a society tend to forget that they're still have desires or still want to do things. They still want to enjoy their life, especially if they're physically able to, or even if they're not, they still have interests and they still have things that they want to do. And so Maud very much still has a lot that she wants to do. She still fights for what she wants. She still loves to travel. She has more stamps on her passport than I do, or probably many of you do. When she wants to travel, she's kind of bored because she's sort of been everywhere, but she still wants to go more places. So I love seeing that. I think older women right now in entertainment are sort of having a moment. We're seeing stories and content produced with them in mind, and this reminded me a lot of stories that I've seen where we see that these women, again, they have agency, they have desires, they still want to do a lot of things. And Ma just wants to travel. She wants to enjoy her fabulous apartment, and people just keep getting in the way of that. So, she takes care of them, and sometimes very creatively. And so I don't know, it's funny because she's, like I said, she's a serial killer. So it's funny, and it's not funny because she is killing people, but it's a story, it's a fiction. But you don't expect it from her, and the things and the shenanigans that she gets up to are just very humorous. So slightly darker than lighter than my other reads, but still still a little dark. So if you like murder mysteries, I guess from the perspective of the murderer and a little bit of humor in that, then I definitely recommend An Elderly Lady Is Up to No Good by Helene Tristan. And then my last pick for you, which is back on brand for sort of the dark reads that I've been that I selected. I didn't intend to. I promise I do read light things too, but I don't know. I guess I was just in a sort of darker read mode this August. So this is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterica, and it's translated from the Spanish by Sarah Moses. Agustina Basterica was born in Buenos Aires in 1974, has a degree in arts from the University of Buenos Aires, and works as a cultural manager and jury member in various literary contests. She's the author of the short story collection 19 Claws and A Black Bird, and the novels Matar a Niña and Tender is the Flesh, the latter of which was awarded the Clarion Novel Prize. Tender is the Flesh established Basterica as a best-selling author worldwide, with translations into 30 languages and 500,000 copies sold in English alone. Tender is the Flesh is currently being adapted for television. Her latest novel, The Unworthy, was published in Spanish in 2023 and received the same enthusiastic reception as Tender is the Flesh, affirming Basterica's status as a prominent author in contemporary literature. So let me tell you about what Tender is the Flesh is about. Working at the local processing plant, Marcos is in the business of slaughtering humans, though no one calls them that anymore. His wife has left him, his father is sinking into dementia, and Marcos tries not to think too hard about how he makes a living. After all, it happened so quickly. First, it was reported that an infectious virus had made all animals meat poisonous to humans. Then governments initiated the transition. Now eating human meat, special meat, is legal. Marcos tries to stick to numbers, consignment, processing. Then one day he's given a gift, a live specimen of the finest quality. Though he's aware that any form of personal contact is forbidden on pain of death, little by little, he starts to treat her like a human being, and soon he becomes tortured by what has been lost and what might still be saved. This is one of the most disturbing and repulsive books that I think I've ever read. So it's hard to say that I enjoyed it, but I couldn't put it down. There were several times that I did have to put it down just out of discomfort, physical discomfort from some of the passages in the book. And again, trigger warning for violence, for gore, animal cruelty. Not a light read at all. So if you are sensitive, especially to bodily harm and body parts, then I wouldn't recommend this for you. I read it first in the original Spanish, and then I recently listened to it as a refresher for our talk today, and it's just as disgusting and captivating in English. I think Sarah Moses did a really good job with the translation. So this book really makes you think about the value of human life for obvious reasons. Human life is a commodity. It's bought and sold for in a very literal way. And it made my skin crawl to just see how the survival instinct takes over and how we're able to shut off a part of our humanity in order to survive. And it does beg the question of what would we do in situations like this when we're removed from it. I think we look at it from a very judgmental perspective, which I think is warranted. But also, we have seen situations where people have had to make really difficult choices in the face of survival. What I found really disturbing, though, is the way that there is part, you can turn off your humanity for survival, but the way that some of the characters in the book seem to relish in it was really disturbing. But I can see something like that happening. I think when people are allowed to just be kind of their most depraved selves, we see the most disturbing things. And this book is a reminder of that, and kind of a warning, I think, for a society like that. We always talk about what's science fiction always kind of shows us what can happen in the future. So I found that very interesting for in this read. For example, the way that many of the characters can get through this ordeal of eating other humans by not even calling them humans. They refer to them as heads. And if you were to just pick this book up and not read the synopsis, you wouldn't even know at first that they were talking about humans, because they just call them heads in the way that they refer to them. So yeah, it really was really thought-provoking. I like to sort of think what I would do in situations like this if I found myself in a world where I had to make a really difficult decision. Also, the study on humanity, when the lack of morality and values disappears, but also when it starts to come back and you sort of start to battle the status quo in society, and whether or not your survival instincts are going to be enough to sort of to ostracize you and make you change the way that you live your life. So yeah, I'm excited for the show to come out. I'm excited to see this on film. I think that this is a really interesting read, and yeah, I recommend it. It is a very dark and disturbing one, but it's an interesting one that I think would be really interesting to get your mind sort of thinking about survival and how we think of food as well, and each other. So those are my recommendations for you. Please let me know if you've read any of them, if you plan on reading any of them. And now I'm handing it over to you, Jose.
You could see my screen. So you really didn't sell me on that last title that you talked about, but it briefly reminds me of a YA title I read called The Unwind. And talks about like unwinding, like physically unwinding the body of a human, and then a little bit of Soylent Green. So I kind of see like those connections there. But the one with the cross stitch, yeah, I'm definitely reading that one. So thank you for those recommendations. So now I have four titles for you, some slightly different, some kind of disturbing. So the first title I want to talk to you about is "Look at the Light, My Love." By Annie Enro, and it was translated from the French by Alison L. Strayer. So Annie Ernaux is a French writer who is mostly known for deep personal autobiographies, including books on her teenage years, her affair, very famously a book called Proof of Life, where she documents both in writing and photography her battle with breast cancer. She did start out her career writing fiction, but she soon started to write what she knows best. Her honest writing earned her the 2022 Nobel Prize for Literature, and this was just for her general writing. I want to quote something here. It said, "For the courage and clinical acuity with which she uncovers the roots of estrangement and collective restraints of personal memory. Her brutal honesty is at times hard to face, as many of us can identify with many of the topics that she's writing about. Her latest book, The Young Man, was released in 2022 and was translated in 2023. Many of her titles were translated into different languages after she won that Nobel Prize, including the book that I'll be talking about today, Look at the Light, My Love, which was released in 2014, but again, not translated until last year. Unlike most of her titles, this book is a lot less introspective. Instead, Annie looks at the outside world through her visits to a supermarket over a year. So this is basically her diary of her visits to the supermarket over a year. And I love this book for like so many reasons. First, it really gives you an easy introduction into Annie's style. You get to understand how she's writing and how she sees the world. So if you enjoy this title, I encourage you to read all of her other titles. Second, on the surface, this title seems kind of light. You know, she's just writing about going to the supermarket for a year. But upon a second look, you see the a social commentary on both issues such as race and class. One of my favorite moments is when Annie is beginning to describe another shopper, and she stops herself and asks herself, "Am I racist for pointing out that this shopper is black? Does it does the race of this person actually matter?" And Annie ultimately decides that she would talk about the person's race, because if she didn't, it would take away from the shopper's identity. And she figured that most people would just picture a white person, and that made me stop because those couple of lines really speaks volumes. A few months ago, 2, maybe 3 months ago, I don't remember. I was reading a book, and one of the characters was the captain of a yacht. Not the owner, the captain, but he did live on a very famous East Coast island where a famous president owns a house. And I was reading and reading, and in my head, this character was white. About two-thirds through the novel, the author finally describes him as African American, and it made me stop. And I was like, why was I picturing him as white? And my wife was reading the same novel at the time. We do that sometimes. I ran over to her. I'm like, hey, the yacht. She's like, yeah, I thought he was white too. And so we do this, and the question is why. And I think that's the beauty of Annie's writing is she makes you stop and ask why, right? And I think this is a reason why we're doing this this webinar, because the vast majority of the books that we read are white males or white females. And so we just naturally think about white characters. And so Annie just beautifully points out her own, you know, biases, unconscious biases, and really brings them to light. Um, but my question then is, does describing the person by the race, did this change my view of the character? Do I take away attributes? Do I add attributes to this person? And how important is the race really? And throughout this book, Annie continues to present these challenges to you. From what time the shoppers go shopping, what time the immigrant shop, what time the single parent shop, what time the professional shop. And also, she talks about how the layout of the store changes throughout the year and how certain items or certain types of items I prioritize and place in a very prominent position, attracting some people and discouraging others. So I encourage you to check out this short nonfiction, and then head out to your local supermarket, head out to your mall, sit down, grab an ice cream, people watch, and see how your perspectives of people around you have changed and what you notice, the layout of the store, or how the store is, how that speaks to the type of clientele they might be trying to attract. It's a beautiful written book. Like I said, it's very short, but I absolutely loved it. So next, I have something completely different for you, and it's Penance by Kanye Miniato, and it's translated from the Japanese by Felipe Gabriel. Uh, our author is a prolific Japanese crime fiction and thriller writer with over 2 dozens of published books in Japan, yet only two have been translated to English. One, her debut novel, Confessions, which is described as the Japanese Gone Girl and was actually turned into an Academy Award nominated movie in 2021 for Best Foreign Language Film. Her follow-up, which is the book I'll be talking about today, was the other book that has been translated, but nothing since then. And it's not for lack of interest, as many of her novels have been adapted for television and screen in Japan. Confessions also received the Alex Award in 2015 here in the United States. And the Alex Award is given to an adult book that has a mass young adult appeal. So obviously, she's a fantastic writer. Prior to publishing Confessions, she was a home economics teacher, and her style of writing has been described as grisly and dealing with the dark side of nature. And she's known as like one of the main eel mystery writers, like EWW, like eel, that's kind of gross. Uh, so Penance is actually her third novel. And as I mentioned, it's only one of two novels that have been translated, but hopefully this will change soon and more of her novels will be translated. This novel centers around the events of a single afternoon and the effects and ramifications of that event. A young girl named Emily and her family move from the big city to a small remote town in Japan because it has the cleanest air in Japan, and her father's company set up a new shop there. Emily befriends four local girls, and one day as they're playing near the school's pool, a strange man comes seeking their help with some repair work in the locker room. He picks Emily to help. The other four girls continue to play before they know it, hours have passed without hearing a word from their friend. They set out to find her, and when they reach the locker room, they find the lifeless body of Emily, and the search for the murder starts. At the start, we learned that at the time of publication, there was a statute of limitation for murder in Japan, and that plays a pivotal role in this novel. So it's important to uh, kind of keep that in mind as you read this novel. So we know that there's a possibility that the murderer gets away due to the statute of limitation. The novel is then split up into four sections: the four friends and Emily's mother. Through each section, we learn how each character experienced the murder, what they did in the immediate aftermath, and how the murder affects the rest of their lives, and the importance the mother has on the four friends. This novel, I truly enjoyed this novel. And that ill factor is definitely there, not only at the beginning with the murder of Emily, but also those twists towards the end that really kind of get you. Miniato really shows her brilliance in writing crime drama. It's a brilliant novel. But what I really enjoyed about this novel is that it gives you a look into traumatic events and how each person can not only view an event differently, but can also be affected with it so differently. We see how each friend, as they grow up, how this event and how the mother of Emily has a huge impact on their life. I truly enjoyed this book. I read a lot of crime drama and a lot of true crime, and this one is well worth your time. So please, please check out this novel. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Our third title is The Last Soter by Elena Ferranti. And yes, this was turned into a Netflix movie. And our author, Elena, is actually a very elusive author. Very little is actually known about the author. We know that Elena is a pseudonym. We know that she was born in Naples, that she might be married and might be a mother. It was first believed that she was shy, but she has done interviews and she did write a quote unquote nonfiction title with some personal information. And she does kind of does most of her talking through her publicist. And Anne Goldstein, who translated this from the Italian, has had many conversations with her, but has never actually met her. And so it's kind of fascinating to think of an author, right? That you don't know anything about. But then this brings to mind the question of does it truly matter if we know who the author is? Um, have you ever stopped liking an author or a movie star or a singer when you find out that maybe their beliefs or their lifestyle doesn't necessarily align with what you find? So, have you stopped enjoying something? So maybe not knowing the artist and just enjoying the art might be a way to go. So now to the book. Uh, a little bit more on the author, sorry. So Elena actually rose to fame with the publication of her tritology, that's 4 books, known as the Napolitanian novels, which follows two female characters from childhood to old age. This collection is considered one of the best collections of the 21st century, and I highly, highly recommend that series. It is absolutely brilliant. But just in case, 4 gigantic novels are not your best interest in getting into getting to know an author, I suggest this title. As I mentioned, it was as it is a standalone. It was made into a film for Netflix, starring the amazing Olivia Colman. I'll watch anything Olivia Colman's in, and directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal. I'll be honest, the movie was actually my introduction to the author, so I'm not ashamed of knowing saying that I didn't know an author before watching a movie based of one of their novels. Um, but I would suggest you read the book first, as it is fascinating. The Lost Daughter follows Lita, a university professor who's on vacation in one of the many beautiful Italian seaside villages. Um, while on vacation, a Neapolitan family catches her attention and slowly, and might I say a little creepily, learns more and more about them, including the name of a young mother, Nina, and her toddler daughter, Elena. One day, Lita finds the family frantically looking for the young toddler. Lita, this kind of triggers a memory for Lita when she lost one of her 2 young children on a beach. Lita eventually actually finds the young girl and her little doll, and for some unknown reason, Lita returns the little girl, but not the doll. The novel really explores the choices a mother makes and who is first, the mother or the child. Through flashbacks triggered by Lita's interactions with Nina and Elena, we learn the choices Lita makes and the impact they had on her relationship on her now grown daughters and her now ex-husband. At the same time, we get to see Nina make these tough choices. We see what she gives up and what she risks. Through the doll, we learn not only about Lita's relationship with her daughters, but also her relationship with her own mother. And I truly enjoyed this film for a variety of reasons, but not so much for because it reminds me of something that's really meant for kids or children's literature called mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. And that's a concept that, a book should do one of 3 things, right? It should be a mirror where the reader sees a reflection of themselves and kind of is affirming of what who they are. It should be a window in which you're able to see the reflection, you're able to see through another person's experience that might not be like you. And it should, or it could be a sliding glass door where you're invited into a world that's different from yours, whether it be fantasy or real. And a book like this, like The Lost Daughter, for me is a true window. I am not a father. I don't think I ever will be a father. And I also will never be a mother. Um, but it really invites me into that world of understanding the difficult choices that a parent makes. It helps me understand the difficult choices my parents made, and it makes me understand the difficult choices other parents, like my sister or cousins or friends, make. So it really kind of speaks to parenthood, and in this case, motherhood, and the choices they make, some of the regrets they've had, and some of the tough choices that lead to ultimately a better place. So I really, really love this book. Also, one of the a side note kind of, uh, Elena really talks a lot about, oh, they were speaking in dialect. They were speaking in dialect. And I didn't understand quite what that meant. But apparently in Italy, everybody speaks Italian. Um, but since Italy wasn't a unified nation for a very long time, each region has their own dialect. And it's so different that many times the two different regions won't understand each other's dialect. So it's just something to keep in mind if you decide to read this book. And finally, my last uh, pick is Goblin Girl by Moa Romanova, and it's translated from the Swedish by Melissa Bowers. Somoa is a Swedish-born artist, so this is a graphic novel, and graphic novels are quite possibly my favorite form of to read. Not because I'm lazy, but because it's a true and unique art form. Uh, and many a times when we think of graphic novels, we think of like Deadpool or Spider-Man, but it's so much more than that, right? Many popular graphic novels have been adapted for television and screen, such as V for Vendetta, Ghost World, and Road to Perdition, just to name a few. So if you've never read a graphic novel, this is fantastic. Or if you need other suggestions, let me know. I'll be more than happy to make them. But back to our author. Moa was a Swedish-born artist who attended an arts high school and only 2 semesters at the Gothenburg School of Art before dropping out and starting to work as a freelance artist and blogger in 2016. She returned to school when she was accepted to the Comic Arts School in Malmö, Sweden. 2 years later, she published the title, which we'll be talking about today. And since her debut, she has published 2 additional titles. So Goblin Girl is an autobiographical book, and Moa uses this format so beautifully to help us see how she felt and how she saw herself during this time in her life. A small warning, this book does include some graphic images. This title is 100% a mature audience book. Not just the images, but also the subject matter. Moa gives us a glimpse into her 20s, which was dominated by depression and anxiety. She's rattled by panic attacks, which only seem to be getting worse. We learn about what relationship she had with a famous person that she matched on one of those like famous dating apps, and the difficult relationship she had with this older man. One thing to pay attention on this book is the color scheme that she uses. She uses very matted colors, which really kind of drag you down and kind of into that depression and anxiety that she's feeling. And then there's very vivid colors when there's perhaps a dream or a positive moment. So if you decide to read this title, I encourage you to kind of take the time and not only read the books, but read the image and read the choices that she makes in the matted colors and this color schemes, the very, just very basic colors that she uses to really illustrate that anxiety and that depression that she was feeling. Um, it's a beautiful, beautiful book. Again, it gives you that window into a world that you might not know. It's sometimes very difficult to understand people who are going through, mental health crisis, whether it be a depression or anxiety, and it's hard for them to describe how they're feeling. And Moa does such a beautiful, beautiful job through the images, right? So you're able to see what she's seen. And I think that's one of the things that I truly loved about this book, and just what I love about graphic novels in general. Hopefully I encouraged you to read one, if not all of these titles. And then I will pass it over to Anna Sylvia.
Thanks, Jose. So right now we are on your screen. If you, first of all, those were really great recommendations. Jose, I really want to read the last one, Goblin Girl. I think that sounded really interesting. I also read The Lost Daughter. Elena Ferrante is such an amazing author. So I highly recommend her. And then here we have, if you are interested, many of you have stayed for the entire thing. So I think you are interested in the books that we shared and continuing to read Women in Translation. So we will share this PowerPoint with you all. So don't worry about needing to jot down any of the websites that are listed here, but these are some really great resources. There is the official Women in Translation Month page. There's the Center for Art of Translation reading list for Women in Translation Month in 2024. Words Without Borders that focuses on books in translation as a whole, and then Global Literature in Libraries Initiative. So these are all great websites to get recommendations, to stay up to date with what's happening. Women in Translation Month is just a month, but you have the entire year and the rest of your reading life to explore really amazing authors. We, of course, would love to share more with you if you want more recommendations. I love to read books in translation. So, shoot me an email if you have any, if you like, we have similar taste, then, I would be happy to recommend any more books to you. So with that, if you have any questions for us, any comments, please let us know. We do have some comments. So I'm just going to go ahead and answer. So the availability for this book, we have a question about the availability. So we did post the links to all of the books that we talked about in the chat. And then you can always go to our catalog and see what's available. And then that will let you know. A lot of these are digital copies. So those are, if they're on our database called Hoopla, then those are available all the time. There aren't any holds for them. So you can assign them for your class. If you want to read them for a book club, I would recommend using that database because, as I said, there aren't any holds for them. You don't have to physically come into the library to get the books. And then we have a comment on Colanzi, who chooses to write in Spanish. I think this was interesting comments. Susanna shared that Colanzi chooses to write in Spanish, although she teaches in English. I assume perhaps erroneously, does that imply a primary Spanish reading audience or an indication of the language in which for fiction at least she feels most at home? I'm not sure, she writes in English for academic purposes or in English or Spanish, depending. I'm actually not sure why she chooses to write in Spanish. Maybe she feels comfortable. But yeah, she definitely has a very strong command of English. She does teach in English, lives, I believe, in the US, at Cornell University, if I'm not mistaken, she teaches. So yeah, maybe it's just a stylistic choice for her. So that would be interesting to read some interviews with her. And let's see, anything else? Any other questions? If you have any other questions for us?
So thank you for your positive comments. Yeah, definitely read the images. That's key for any graphic novel, and it's key for any painting. Question why the artist made the choice to make. It's not there just to be there. There's definitely, just like the words that an author chooses matter, the style and the colors also matter. So yeah, definitely check out Goblin Girl. That's truly one of my favorites. All right. Well, once again, we want to thank you for joining us today. As Anasiba said, we'll hopefully do this again next year, but hopefully let us know. We will send out the PDF of this, and I will also send out an edited version of this recording to everybody, and I'll post it online. So if you want to share with anybody who might have missed it. And when you get that email from Sylvia and I, if you have ideas for the type of book recommendation webinars you want to see, let us know. Do you want us to focus on a certain genre or certain type? We'll definitely could get on that. We want to continue offering these types of programs. We want to make sure that there are programs that are of your interest and that you will enjoy. So definitely just let us know and we'll get working on that. So Ana Sylvia, any last words?
Well, just echoing your sentiments. Thank you everybody for joining us. This was really fun to put together. I really like reading works in translation, so an excuse to discover new authors is always really fun, especially when I get to do it for work. So thank you, and thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.